Cover boarding. Can't see target. Need backup.
Hey, so I just moved into a mansion in New York City that I'm splitting rent on with 15 other entrepreneurs that I met online. And I'm not sure how well this video will do, but I just kind of wanted to show you like a little window into our crazy lifestyle. So here is the house. You can't quite see the penthouse, but it's a 4-story brownstone. Is the first floor here, and co-working space over there. I think what perhaps is the most funny is that this closet here has been converted into a room for show. We only really did that because we don't have that many bedrooms for all 16 of us. There's Riley. This is where a couple sleeps, and Donna sleeps here. So 3 people in this room. Having some issues with kitchen cleanliness. It doesn't look horrible right now, but we got a security camera. This is another room. A couple is over here, and Nick is over there. So another triple. Camilla lives here. Shreya sleeps. Riley sleeps in this like 4-foot space. His room is between the closet and the ceiling here. So wonderful little spot that we entrepreneured. This is the Emma and Georgie room. Extra beds. Jackie's up here. This is Grind Central USA. And then here's our little movie theater turned into a triple. I live there. Justin lives here. Jackie lives in this little enclave. And here is the outdoor area. So we get a nice little spot to view the city, play cards outside.
Okay, Mr. Denninger, good to have you back. Ticker guy, he's making a return. Last time we spoke was in August, and I have to make a note that my channel did get a community guideline strike when we had our chat. So I want to thank you, Karl, for that one.
Well, yeah, they have some rather interesting ideas of what you can talk about and what you can't, I guess.
Well, as you know, August, we're talking about lockdowns, the ongoing situation with the Fauci elixir getting jawboned. Fauci in Italian means jawbone. So anything regarding the Fauci elixir, we'll refer to it as getting jawboned. So we see a lot of these things, a lot of the COVID narrative is being lifted, not lifted, but a lot of the mandates are being lifted. It seems that apparently that the Omicron variant is dying down. You can see politicians not wearing masks anymore. You go about your daily routine, you see less and less people wearing their chin bras. And now we're moving on to the next crisis, which is this ongoing situation in Ukraine. Why don't we start a little bit about with this ongoing crisis in Eastern Europe. We've talked a little bit about that on my channel the last couple of weeks. Why don't you give us a little blow by blow, and then we can get lost in the weeds on some other topics.
Okay, that sounds good. So I think we should start with the history on this, because everybody loves to focus only on the last 15 minutes that was on their smartphone. And when it comes to international relations, that's a pretty poor thing to do, because essentially nothing in the international world of politics, and of course war, von Clausewitz says, is politics by other means, said. The reality is that the seeds of this go all the way back to the Soviet Union and when it dissolved and the wall came down. And if you remember, when that occurred, Germany was 2 countries, East and West. And after the war came down, the immediate political question was, how do we integrate these two, one formerly communist, one capitalist nation, into one country? And then what happens after that? And there were representations made, and these are well documented. You can find them. They were in the notes taken by the people who were involved in the meetings. It is not speculation by any stretch of the imagination. And the representations that were made were that NATO would not expand eastward, that what formerly was the Warsaw Pact, of course, dissolved when Soviet Russia went away as well. And so there, you can look at NATO as having formed as essentially a counterbalance to the Warsaw Pact, because of course through that entire period of time, we all thought that we were, 1 minute from midnight, we we're all going to nuke each other into oblivion. And so one of the things that we put on the table and we made very clear was that this was not our intention. We did not intend to continue to expand NATO because there wasn't any reason to do it anymore. And that was part of what led the integration with Germany to proceed so quickly. In fact, it happened so fast that nobody who was involved in it at the time thought it was going to happen that quickly. No one thought that it would be able to be pulled off like that, but it was, and very successfully too. You look at Germany over the last 40 years. Gee, what happened after the wall came down is absolutely fabulous in terms of how quickly all that came together, and then of course the European Union and everything related to that. But then in 2004, the United States ratified in the Senate, so by formal treaty, the accession of several former Soviet states into NATO. Now, this was after we had told them we wouldn't do this. That did not make Russia very happy, as you can imagine. But that didn't lead to immediate hostilities. Nothing really awful happened at that point in time. But there was a lot of noise diplomatically that was made. I remember it quite well when it occurred, and I was before I was writing the market ticker, but I had commented to some friends of mine that I thought that this was a dangerously stupid act on our part. There was no reason for it. The only real reason to do it at all was that everybody over the last, really post-war, post-World War II, had essentially been sucking off the United States military budget. We'd been providing essentially peace and security for most of the world, especially the Western world. It didn't work out so good in places like Korea and Vietnam, of course, but certainly did work out quite well in Europe. And Europe, if you recall, has a several hundred-year history of people going less than 50 years before they all decide to kill one another. Mm-hmm. And that's been a repeated pattern. Okay, that's not something that only happened once. It's happened throughout history, is that for whatever reason, the people in Europe get mad at one another and a war starts over there. So we had a very long period, historically speaking. I mean, it's been 70 years now, right, since that kind of thing happened over there. That's, from a historical perspective, that's a very long period of time. And then in 2014, when Barack Obama was president of the United States, there was an uprising in Ukraine. It was at Maidan Square, and that turned into a literal shooting revolution. There were snipers that were shooting into the demonstrators. It was a real no BS revolution by anybody's definition. Our Senate had people over there giving speeches encouraging it. John McCain was one of the people who did that. He gave an actual speech to the protesters at Maidan, and essentially was, go get them kind of rah-rah stuff. And the argument at the time, which had a fair bit of validity, was that Ukraine was a horribly corrupt cesspool, and the leadership, Yankovic at the time, was essentially stealing all of the prosperity from the people there and keeping it for himself. And by the way, he was also a Soviet puppet, a Russian puppet now, because of course Soviet was gone. Okay, so a little bit of time goes by, you get Poroshenko, and then now we have Zelensky. Okay. Zelensky, prior to being elected, had no political experience whatsoever. Now, all of a sudden, according to many reports, the man has over $1 billion. Where'd he get it from? Okay, so here's a guy. I mean, we're not talking about some business, I mean, this is not Elon Musk. Okay.
He's a comedian.
Yeah. I mean, this is not the Ukraine's version of Elon Musk or somebody like that. All right. I mean, the guy literally, told jokes for a living, right? And then okay, so fine. Well, you know what? We've had actors. Ronald Reagan was an actor, quite famously, right? So I mean, that's who cares what he did before? But the interesting thing is that in Russia and its satellite nations, which split off after the Warsaw Pact folded, there has long been a very corrupt system of oligarchs who essentially screw the public, run the country, and the various businesses and such within it. And there's a lot of kickbacks that go on back and forth within that. Okay, this is the reason, by the way, that in the current conflict, we sanctioned the oligarchs and we've been seizing their yachts and doing things like this. But the same situation, the same sort of structure, if you will, exists in the Russian satellites, and that includes Ukraine. So the obvious answer as to where the money's come from is from the Ukrainian oligarchs. All right. Well, I mean, each country as a sovereign is free to decide whatever its political structure it wants to have. It's we may like it, we may not like it, but frankly, it's not our business. It's theirs. And if the people are unhappy with it, they should do something about it. If they think it's fine, well, who am I to judge? So that's somewhat of a backstory here. After the 2014 revolution, as soon as that happened, Russia came in, Putin came in and seized Crimea. And what people need to understand about that action is that that particular port is the only 12-month deep water naval port that Russia has. And when we got involved in 2014, I wrote a series of columns and I said, we are out of our blankety blanking minds if we think that Russia is ever going to give that up. That is their naval asset that they've had. That land has been under Russian control since before the czars. And if Putin has to go to war over it, he will. So, if we want to get involved in this and Ukraine wants to do whatever it wants to do, blah, 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 okay, fine. But understand that this is exactly the same situation as if the Chinese came into Mexico, agitated for a revolution there, got it. A couple of the northern states in Mexico split off, decided to affiliate themselves with the Chinese government, and then they started agitating for California to break off and take San Diego, which is our deep water naval port on the West Coast. All right, we would slam any nation that tried to do that. If we had to go in with military force to secure that property, we would do it. And I think anybody in America that says that we would not is out of their mind. You're crazy. You know full well that we would defend that is U.S. property, that is our naval facility, and we would be goody blankety blanked if we would let some other country come in there and take it away. That's just not going to happen. Well, the same thing happened here. Okay. So this was the state of play right up until a couple of months ago. Harris went over and made a speech in Europe where she essentially attempted to goad Ukraine into joining NATO. And when I heard that, I said, you just started a war. I don't know if she knew she'd start a war, but you started a war. NATO, literally, 10 miles from Russia's 12-month, no, that's not going to happen. And there's been a lot of back and forth about, so in Donbas, the Ukrainians, there are some military units there that are a little on the questionable side. They've been intermittently shelling that part of the country ever since the 2014 event. There hasn't been a, it's one of the, it's kind of like the, the Rebel Alliance versus the, versus the Emperor and his troops, right?
Yeah.
But because it's, it's kind of like stinging bees, right? It's that kind of, it's harassment level stuff, but it is killing civilians, and it's been going on for a long time. And so, and Putin just decided, okay, you've now gone across a line I can't accept. And so here we are, and he rolled the troops and the tanks. And I wasn't really surprised that it happened after I heard that speech. And I was like, okay, that was stupid. But to some extent, we egged it on. Now, does that make Putin less of a prick? No. Okay. But like I said, I mean, if the same sort of situation happened on our West Coast in America, I think you probably have seen the same response. So and once the shooting started, what I will say to everybody that's listening to this podcast is that anybody that takes anything that comes out of either side, I don't care who it is, and takes it as factual without hard proof and backup is nuts.
Right.
There's the first casualty of war is the truth. Okay. And anybody that, I mean, all you got to do is go back and look at what Walter Cronkite had to say when we were in Vietnam after the Tet Offensive while it was going on. He proclaimed that the war was unwinnable and that we were taking huge losses and da da da. The NVA was literally sending untrained 13-year-old children with AK-47s to go shoot at us because they were out of soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that was not, I mean, unwinnable. Excuse me. Maybe they would have fought to the last woman and child, but I don't know about that.
We did technically win the Tet Offense, and the media spun it as if we were just taking massive losses and it's an unwinnable war.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they started the Tet Offense. Okay.
Right.
The NVA was the one that initiated that. They did not get a single objective out of that offensive. What they did do is end up with most of their fighting men dead. And so, I mean, but there is no, you can try to find absolute truth within conflict, but it's very hard to do because everybody that is giving you a report has some kind of spin on it. And I don't believe any of it without verification. It's just two things that were widely reported, and both of them turned out to be complete garbage. The first was a Snake Island thing where there was a small garrison. Supposedly the Russian Navy shows up with a warship, says, put down your guns, surrender, you're done. We're sitting out here. We got big guns. You got nothing. And they said, blank you. And they all got shelled and died. Okay. And that was the first story, was basically those evil Russians just killed everybody. Well, actually, no, they surrendered. That's what we later found out. There was no shelling. The place is still there. Now, did they tell the Russian Navy to go F itself? Maybe not. I don't know. But those evil brutes killed everybody and cut off their heads and slaughtered all the children. It just didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one was the so-called, the midnight rider, if you will, of Kiev, the Ukrainian pilot that was, became an ace in 15 minutes. No, the footage that was put up was literally from a video game. Okay.
Ridiculous.
So I mean, the Ghost of Kiev thing, and here's the problem with that. I am sure that that plenty of the stories coming out of both sides are true. Okay. But there's also a lot of them that are false. And one of the things that everybody tried to run with just a couple of days ago was that the entirety of Ukraine and most of Eastern Europe was going to glow in the dark because the Russians had cut power off to Chernobyl, which of course we know, years ago had a really bad accident. Okay. And as a result, without power, everything there was unstable and it was all going to go down the toilet. Well, that's a lie. Even the IAEA has come out and said that's a lie, that the cooling pools there are in a state, as are the reactors, that as long as you can keep putting water in them, they're fine. They don't need forced circulation. So is it a good situation? No, it's not a good situation. I mean, you cut the power off the plant. Are we about to have nuclear Armageddon as a result of it? No, we're not. So, just everybody needs to be cautious here, because fog of war is a thing, but so is propaganda. And as soon as you have an actual armed conflict, everybody tries to spin everything that happens to suit whatever side of the engagement they're on. And like I said, I have no love for Putin, but I understand how we got here. And there was a lot of reckless stuff that went on, and Zelensky's responsible for a good part of it, because he could have turned around when Harris showed up over there in Europe and started making noises about NATO accession and UN membership and things like this. He could have turned around and said, absolutely not. Okay, no, sorry. We understand we're a buffer state, we're a buffer nation between Russia and NATO. We're not changing that. We don't like what's going on with the interference that Russia has over in the eastern provinces. And there's a problem there, and we need to find a way to solve that. But no, we are not going to sit there and poke the bear until it bites us.
Well, it seems that the recklessness is really continuing, right? Because now we have this complete incompetence that's being demonstrated by, Anthony Blinken, who's, announcing that we're going to send jets to Ukraine via Poland, and then Poland is denying it, and the Pentagon is shooting it down. And we seem to go back and forth, in terms of the degree to which the U.S. is willing to support Ukraine. And this strikes me as very dangerous because, Russia has indicated that they will respond very aggressively to any interference.
Well, sure, it is very dangerous, but let's not kid ourselves what has happened in the past when people have done things like this. You remember this little steamship called the Lusitania, right? It was sunk by the Germans. It was one of the reasons that America went into the World War, the Great War. And the British and the Americans claimed, even 50 years after the war was over, that there was not a single banned bad thing on that boat. Okay. For decades, we said, oh, no. Those evil Germans, they torpedoed it. There was nothing. There was no contraband on there. Well, this all changed when diving technology and ROV technology advanced enough that they were actually able to get some people down there to take a look at what was in the cargo hold. And all of a sudden, the British said, you might not want to go in there. Oh, why not?
Yep.
Well, there might be some explosives in there. Oh, you mean the ones that you've been telling us for all these years didn't exist?
Well, Mr. Denninger, I don't know if you're aware of this, but in the 1980s, Russian subs were practicing maneuvers in close proximity to the wreck of the Lusitania, and they heard explosions. And when the Russian sub got a bit closer, they realized that the Royal Navy was depth charging the wreck of the Lusitania, and the Russians called them out saying, "You're destroying evidence."
Well, yeah, it is. But, at the end of the day, they didn't manage to actually do anything, right? Because they got the craft in there, and it's like, okay, guys, you're caught.
Yeah.
But, this is so, and again, this kind of thing is not uncommon. All right. And so for anybody that wants to take a look at this and say, oh, point fingers at the United States and point fingers at, at this country or that, all nations do this kind of thing in a time of war. So I think we have to have a little perspective that, there still are some adults in the room. The people at the Pentagon that turned around and told Poland, you know what, we're not putting those jets over at Ramstein and then trying to figure out how to get them into Ukraine. We're not going to let you do that. And the reason we're not going to let you do that is that those are offensive arms. Those are not javelins and stingers intended to, blow up somebody's tank that's trying to kill you. They are offensive weapons. And if they come through the United States, it is a reasonable assumption that Putin will conclude that the United States has entered the conflict on Ukraine's side. And that means we're at war with Russia. Now, if, that could end very badly.
To say the least.
Yeah. So, I mean, that could end very badly. And we still have a few sane people within our military establishment who said, that's probably a really stupid thing to do. But Zelensky running around screaming about the UN or NATO putting a no-fly zone over the nation is not, is not helping things.
Right.
That would
He
also
seems
be
to be,
that. Yeah.
sorry, he seems to be quite, rabid about putting a no-fly zone up. I think earlier this week, he did type of like a Zoom conference with the Senate, demanding a no-fly zone, demanding military aid. I think yesterday we passed some type of aid package, $13 billion to the Ukrainians, and in my assumption, one way or another, that's going to circle back and go into the pockets of some of our own oligarchs and people that helped to, make that aid package possible.
Well, it's certainly going to enrich the people that make weapons. I mean, you got to buy them from somewhere, right?
Yeah.
The bigger question that I have when you have a nation that's as badly fractured as Ukraine is, and I don't think anybody should be in some way of the notion that Ukraine is sort of like the United States. Okay. I mean, first off, the people that are saying that Putin has essentially accomplished nothing, folks, Ukraine is about 1,000 miles wide. It's approximately the size of Texas. Okay. There's an awful lot of people running around that think it's the size of Delaware. And I'm not quite sure where that came from. Nobody's ever looked at a map. Well, I mean, you got to wonder, right?
We don't learn geography.
Yeah, I mean, geography was not your strong suit in school, right? But more to the point is that, okay, so you've got that going on, but in a fractured nation, the risk isn't so much that that handing a bunch of stingers and javelins to Ukrainians, Putin's going to look at that and go, okay, the United States is now part of the war. I don't think that sort of action is likely. And certainly providing humanitarian aid, medical technology and things like this. Nobody in their right mind is going to, get cranked off about that. I mean, yeah, Putin probably doesn't like it, but he's certainly not going to go shoot at America over it. The bigger problem is that once that material gets there, keeping it under control of the people that are reasonably cohesive with the government and not having it fall into the hands of people who are fractured away from it is impossible. And so essentially, and this is already, there's been reports this is already happening, that essentially you have some of these weapons that have been taken up by the gangs that are over there, and they've been stolen. Okay, they were taken from the soldiers. They get things get captured when there's a war. Okay, not everybody that starts with something ends up keeping it, and so and some of it gets shot off and used, but not all of it. And some of the unused stuff ends up in the hands of people you don't want, and that could end up being very bad down the road, because I don't know of any way to get that stuff back. I mean, we tried to get that stuff back in places like Afghanistan. Didn't work out very well.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, of course, now we're debating, what's going on with those bio research labs in Ukraine that, don't exist, and now they do exist. And, they're just, health research facilities, but, we don't want them to fall in Russian hands because that might make them more healthy or something.
The amusing part of that is that there was actually a law passed in the United States, the Lugar Act, that was for the specific purpose of cooperating and coordinating with the people over there on this stuff. And there's been quite an attempt by, and I don't know who's doing the attempt, but probably State Department, to scrub this off the internet. But they seem to forget that anything you put on the internet never goes away. And so the actual articles have been dredged up, and that's real. Okay. Now, what were they doing in those labs? That's an open question. Russia's made some very incendiary allegations, specifically that there was specific DNA targeting research being done, which is that would be a rank violation of the biological weapons treaties that the United States is a party to. I again, show me the proof. Okay. Yeah, I don't. Well, and propaganda too. I mean, everybody has a reason to lie. Okay, so that is an incendiary allegation. It is extremely serious, and I refuse to accept it without evidence.
I find it quite disturbing that a lot of people on the right are sort of uncritically accepting the Russian government's point of view. I mean, it's one thing to sympathize or to put things in a broader context, as you've done, to explain what's happening. It's another thing to just kind of believe Russia and China whenever they make an accusation. But on the other hand, I mean, the U.S. government is not exactly trustworthy when it comes to these issues. I mean,
well,
we know, right? COVID probably leaked from a Chinese lab, where it had U.S. funding. So.
Well, there's another aspect to this too, which is that, and I don't know if you remember the infamous Reagan thing that happened when he was in office. It was seared into my brain at the time it occurred.
Star Wars?
No, he was supposedly on a hot mic. Now, of course, that's BS. He knew exactly what he was doing. Anyone that thinks that was an accident has rocks in their head. But on a allegedly hot mic, he got caught saying, "I have just signed legislation to outlaw the Soviet Union. The bombing starts in 15 minutes."
What?
Well, this was this was supposedly a sound check for a speech he was going to give. Okay. But supposedly the mic was accidentally hot. Yeah, bull. All right. That, and the Kremlin found out about that 5 minutes after it happened, right? Well, when Trump was in office, he supposedly told Putin, I don't know if this is true, Trump may be lying, but he supposedly told Putin that if he went so much as a foot into Ukraine, he'd blow up Moscow.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, here's the thing. Both of those events, from a diplomatic point of view, are masterful strokes. And the reason is this. You always want the other guy to think you're a little bit crazy. not batshit nuts, okay, but a little crazy. And you always want in the back of his head that nagging thing, would he actually do it?
Mm-hmm.
You don't ever want him to believe that under no circumstances would you push the button. Okay, that's dangerous, because then you get stepped on.
Trump supposedly said that to Xi as well.
Well,
that something about if you invade Taiwan, I'll nuke China or something, and Xi was allegedly completely stunned.
Yeah,
he had no idea.
Yeah, well, he apparently said allegedly said that if they went into Taiwan, he'd flatten Beijing.
Yeah.
Okay,
He was like speechless.
Well, but again, there is value in international diplomacy to letting the other guy believe that you're just a little unhinged, not crazy like Kim Jong-un. Okay, that's a different level of nuts. All right, you start doing stuff like what North Korea has done, and everybody knows you're insane, and then you got real problems. But that just that nagging little thing in the back of your head, there's real value to that, because it is a very powerful deterrent.
Well, and I think Putin is using that as well against us, right? By making us think, he put his nuclear force on whatever.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah,
he wants us to think that he's capable of nuking us.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is, but again, this is statecraft. Okay, this is the real deal, and it's not, it's not unhinged stupidity. It is intended to make the people on the other side sit back in the chair for a minute before they do something dumb and think long and hard. Does he mean it? And how sure are we that he's not?
Well, I mean, what do you think about the sanctions that are being imposed on Russia, and maybe even more impactful, the corporate blacklisting of the Russian economy, which seems to be designed to destroy the Russian economy. But somehow I suspect it's going to hurt the West in a lot of ways as well. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, well, first off, I think it's sanctions have never worked. I don't care who you use them against. Did it stop Iran? Did it stop North Korea from ultimately developing a thermonuclear weapon?
Japan.
Well, yeah. Speaking of which, what happened when we quote unquote sanctioned their oil supply in the early, in 1939, right? What happened a year and a half later? All right. So, no, sanctions don't work. The other problem you have is that the idea that you can cut off somebody who has something you need is really stupid. And we put ourselves in that situation. We didn't do it overnight. It didn't happen just on Biden's watch or just on one president. It's happened over the last 30, 40 years. We have offshored our productive capacity. We have become energy dependent on other people. And it isn't just where you think it is. For example, neon is an absolutely essential element in the lasers that do the etching in modern semiconductors, the high density stuff.
Right.
Russia is one of the primary sources for that. So can you cut that off and still have all the chips you want? Nope, you can't. Now, we've had this phalanx of American corporations that have essentially decided to drop their own sanctions on Russia. They're going to pay for that, and I don't think they're going to like the way that ends up. That, in my opinion, that is really stupid. And the reason is this. So Visa and MasterCard turned around, did that, shut off all their credit cards, right, for cross-border. It took them less than a day for the Russian banks to set up the interchange arrangements with the Chinese banks. They just evaded the sanction. All that Visa and MasterCard did was take the money that they were going to earn on the interchange fees and throw it in the toilet. They gained absolutely nothing by doing this. And then just yesterday, and I don't know how serious this threat really is, but there was a threat that was made by somebody within the Russian parliament that they're going to pass a law to seize and nationalize the assets of any corporation that did this in Russia.
Wow, I did not know. That's interesting. I had no idea that was the case.
Well, I mean, can they do it? Of course they can do it. What, does anybody remember how we ended up in the situation with Iran so many years ago? Do you remember how that happened?
To be honest, I'm spitballing here. I would assume it had something to do with Israel.
No.
Weapons. They're trying to develop enriched uranium.
No. This is before that. This is
79 with the Ayatollah.
Before that. How did the Iranian Revolution take place? What caused it?
The spike in oil prices, wasn't it?
No, the Iranian government nationalized the assets of BP.
Okay.
All right. And British Petroleum and the British government asked us for help. And we went over and interfered in their internal processes because they nationalized another country's stuff. It wasn't even ours. And the result of that ultimately was all the fun and games that went on with the seizure of the embassy and everything that's come since.
Now, I was interested to read that McDonald's, they're closing down all of their locations in Russia, which is like 850 stores. But
yeah, that's small, by the way.
Oh, you think? Okay.
Well, I mean, how many McDonald's are in your local town?
Several, at least.
Okay.
Yeah. But there's like 26,000 employees in Russia, and they're still getting paid, apparently. So McDonald's is still paying them.
How?
Well, that's a good question.
There's this little problem with your check can't clear, right? Because we sanctioned all the financial stuff.
Right. Well, I think they're trying to figure it out, right? I mean, this is I've
the theory I've seen is that these companies, first of all, they're virtue signaling, big time, and also they're trying to figure out how to get money in and out of the country. And so this kind of alleged blacklisting of Russia is really more of like a pause while they sort that out. I don't know if they're going to be able to, though.
Well, like I said, I mean, the threat that I heard yesterday was that what was going to happen there was that the parliament was going to pass a law that says that if you're a participant in this, we're going to nationalize all your assets, which of course is, that if they do that, then under U.S. accounting rules, every one of those companies has to immediately take the write down on the capital value of all of that, plus all the intangibles that were associated with it. The hit on the balance sheets will be immediate and nasty.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's people think that this is a one-way street. Well, it's not. And the other problem that you have with the energy situation, which of course is, people think that they can we can strangle Russia with the energy. No, we can't. First off, Europe won't do it because they need it. Okay. So, nice idea, guys. But because everybody listened to Greta Thunberg and shut down all of their coal and nuclear plants over in Europe, they now have this little dependency problem with these pipes that come across Ukraine and into the European nations. And unless they want to freeze to death in the winter and broil in the summer, they kind of need that energy in order to be able to generate power.
1/3 of Europe's energy comes from Russia.
Right. And I mean, we're not talking small ball here. Okay.
No.
The other
Can't
problem,
replace that very easily.
You can't replace that at all without turning all that stuff back on. And fortunately for Germany anyway, the nuclear plants can be restarted, but all the coal stuff that was literally bulldozed is gone. All right. And they have the coal, they have the natural resource to feed it with. They just refuse to use it because, well, it's not green enough. And the windmills and the solar are just not enough to make up the difference. So the other problem you have is that I have, for the last 30 years or so, I've said that if there was going to be a third world war, that one of the high risk ways that it starts is that China, which is resource poor when it comes to energy, but has an awful lot of people, looks to their north and sees a neighbor that is resource rich and people poor. And when they can't get what they want by trying to buy it, they take it. At the point that that happens, Russia's only option, because they're outnumbered militarily 10-1 or better, just on manpower. Russia's only option is to nuke them.
Right.
Okay. So, I mean, if you want to think about the nightmare scenarios of how a nuclear conflict starts on a global basis, that's been one of the ones that's been on my radar for an awfully long time. Now, all of a sudden, you have Xi and Putin that are building pipelines. Well, okay, that kind of takes the temperature down a little bit on China deciding to just go take it, right?
Right.
But it also means that trying to sanction Russian energy is a waste of time.
Well, I mean, it seems like these actions have the effect of pushing Russia closer to China and kind of deepening this economic integration between Russia, China, and possibly other countries in that Eurasian continent. And also, I can't help but see this as almost a destruction of globalization. I mean, we're basically taking the 8th largest or the 8th most populous country in the world and trying to completely disconnect them from the global economy. I mean, I don't see how that doesn't have adverse consequences for the whole world.
Well, it clearly does. I mean, I don't think there's any possibility that it doesn't. It certainly is interesting just from a standpoint of the shift in global power that's going on right now. But I think it also points out the folly that we got ourselves into in the West with thinking that we could take all the manufacturing that we didn't want because it wasn't so green. We wanted our clean water and our clean air and our clean everything else. And we pretended that we actually cleaned everything up, and we didn't. What we did was we shoved it over in China where they have slave labor and they don't care about the environment. And, over time, and the theory that some macroeconomists have had, and they've held this opinion for an awfully long time, that this process would not last, that the poisoning would not be allowed for very long, nor would the slave labor conditions. And that as prosperity started to flow into that country, that essentially the political power would shift and they'd be forced to cut it out. Well, we were told that about NAFTA in Mexico too. Okay, we were told when NAFTA was signed that within 10 years, Mexican wages would be at parity with US wages when it came to automobile parts and auto assembly. It never happened. So I think there's a little problem here with the theory, especially when you have governments that are repressive to some degree, and Mexico's is to some extent. China's is to a very large extent.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you do those kinds of things,
So now we're stuck in a situation where we are heavily dependent on other countries for basic things like semiconductors, like pharmaceuticals, like now apparently energy, thanks to Biden. Fertilizer, right. And we have spiraling inflation.
Well, so fertilizer is, the feedstock for fertilizer is natural gas. Most people don't understand this. Fertilizer, for the most part, is nitrogen, okay? But nitrogen, of course, is in the air. The majority of what you breathe is nitrogen. But you have to fix it in a form where it can actually get into the ground and fertilize the plants. And that's where the natural gas comes from. That's where that comes in. Without it, you're not making fertilizer in commercially viable quantities today by the processes we use. So the idea that we can abandon natural gas, we can abandon fossil fuels, is just pure you know what. Okay, sure, if you all want to starve to death. I mean, and over in Europe, it's much worse. If we were to curtail our use of mass agricultural fertilizers in the United States, it would probably cut our crop yields by somewhere between 50 and 70%. Now, that is an enormous number, but it would cut them in Europe by 90%. And that's simply because they use much more on a per acre foot basis in order to get the yields that they get. And they have to have them because they have to feed their people. Well, guess what? They don't have a lot of natural gas. Guess where they get it all from?
Well, Ukraine, natural gas, Ukraine and Russia.
Well, Ukraine, okay, so here's the other cute thing. There's a report floating around out there, and I can't verify it, that, I mean, if you look at the pipelines that go through Ukraine right now, none of them originate or terminate in Ukraine. Okay, other than the minor little drops that are used within Ukraine to provide fuel to Ukrainian cities and people. But that's not the source. The source is all Russian. But there is a report out there that says that Ukraine has an absolutely ridiculous untapped amount of reserves in natural gas in the ground. Now, I don't know if it's true.
Well, I mean, that seems like it would be good news. You know, you have the peak oil people sort of arguing that we're bumping up against the limits of economic growth because energy is just becoming too expensive to.
I've heard that. I've heard that twaddle for 30 years, and how come we're still here?
Right.
You know, the interesting thing is that what you look at what happened in 2008. We had oil prices spiked to $140, okay, and gas went over $4, and everybody thinks that the housing crash was what set off the recession in 2008. They're wrong. What set off the recession in 2008 is the fact that petroleum is in absolutely everything. You could take a look at your desk, you take a look at your computer. Every single piece in that machine, with a handful of exceptions, exists because of petroleum. Okay, your monitor, the plastic. What do you think makes plastic? Okay, the shingles on your roof. I mean, oil is everywhere. Okay, whether you like it or not. And the other thing is that it moves everything from one place to another. So when you see these kinds of price spikes, it puts cost. It's kind of like a value-added tax. You know, they do that over in Europe, where they add a tax for every step of production. Every piece of additional value gets taxed. Well, when you have this kind of a thing happen with oil prices and with energy costs, It's a value-added tax, except it's not a tax that goes to the government and then redistributed. It just disappears out of people's balance sheets.
Right.
And so, and the other thing that many people don't understand is that with any commodity, and I don't care what it is, I don't care if it's corn, wheat, hogs, frozen concentrated orange juice, hello trading places, or anything else, every single barrel of oil you want to burn today, you're going to pay whatever the price of the last one is. And that's because if you don't get to burn the last one. So that's what it costs. And so, some of this, the price of energy was headed up on a dramatic basis from the point at which Joe Biden was elected. Joe Biden promised during the campaign that he would do this. He said he was going to do it on purpose, that it was deliberate. And this is what the people in America voted for. This is who we elected into the presidency. And I know there's people that say the election was stolen, whatever. Okay, whatever the case may be, the fact of the matter is we have a president who ran on doing exactly this. Okay. And on his first days in office, what did he do? He shut down Keystone and he canceled leases. So, and he's refusing to process any new ones. So you have, and by the way, Jimmy Carter did this very same thing when he was in office to the nuclear fuel reprocessing industry. He banned it by executive order. He did it because he believed that there was no way that American commercial industry could safely use nuclear power to produce electricity, and that we would eventually blow ourselves up doing it, and we'd get Fukushima 100 times over and we'd all die. So he was of the opinion that this could not be done safely. We just did not have the panache, even though in the military, the Navy has a perfect safety record on it in the United States. The Soviet Union, not so much, but we do. But in the civilian world, he did not believe this was possible. And so he banned it. Well, Ronald Reagan, on his first day in office, canceled that executive order. It's one of the first things he did when he was sworn in. It didn't make a bit of difference. There is still to this day no commercial nuclear fuel reprocessing in the United States. And the reason is because not one company is stupid enough to risk having their investment confiscated a second time.
Right. Well, and Biden also said that we should throw oil company executives in prison.
Yeah.
Now the talking points from the White House right now are that the energy companies are to blame for the high fuel prices, that we have thousands of approved drilling permits that are not being used. And what do they need, an embroidered invitation, as Jen Psaki said?
Yeah, I heard that from Psaki. Okay, so how about a few facts? The percentage of unused leases in the United States is the lowest it's been in the last 30 years. And that's simply because you buy the lease before you know if there's anything recoverable there. And then you have to do the geological work. You think if you don't think there's any possibility, you'd obviously never bid on it, right? But if you bid on it and win, you still don't know until you actually start sticking straws in the ground, which you can't do until you have the lease. You don't know if there's anything there worth sticking the straw for. Okay. So you have to do the exploration, and that takes time. It takes capital investment, and nobody in their right mind is going to spend that money if they don't think they're going to get to be able to take the product out of the ground and sell it.
Sure. So we have a very adversarial administration towards energy production, I think it's fair to say, and that might help explain why gasoline was up 6.6% in February.
Well,
and that's before you take into account the impact of Ukraine.
Right. So everything in the current CPI that just came out is prior to the invasion. Okay. The facts are that in January of 2021, when Biden was sworn into office, gasoline was $2.35 a gallon. In October, it was almost $1 higher. And in November, it went up a little bit more, and then it actually fell in January, believe it or not. when all of this was about to start. Okay, so okay, Putin, terrible, evil, horrid man. Well, okay, if he was being terrible, evil, rattling a saber and everything else, why'd gas prices go down a dime? Because they did. And then, of course, once the invasion happened, the rocket shot came. Well, yeah, the rocket shot came because there's nothing to pick up the slack, and everybody's talking about sanctioning. Shell ditched all of their production coming out of Russia. And oh, by the way, Shell is, as you know, has stations all over the United States, don't they? So I
I
mean,
believe so.
yeah. So there's a Shell station right down the street from me. So there's been a lot of hostility to energy production, domestic energy production, unless it's green energy. And I don't have a particular problem with it, other than the fact that on the basis of thermodynamics, it doesn't work, and it's expensive. And the bigger problem is that it's unreliable. So you cannot make the wind blow and you cannot make the sun shine. There are these things called clouds that tend to get in the way of this once in a while. And if you want something reliable, what this means is that you need another source on standby, staffed, maintained, ready to go in the event that those things happen. And if you don't, when you flip your light switch, nothing works. Okay. We could not today, if we wanted to, replace our motor vehicle fleet, just private automobiles, with electric cars. We physically could not do it. Not only could we not build the vehicles because we can't get enough lithium to make the batteries, which, by the way, the primary place where that's processed is China. And the reason is it is an insanely nasty environmental process to do. The damage it does, it has to be separated out in open leach pools. It's horrible. The chemical process that's used for that is just ridiculously nasty. We won't do it in the United States because it's nasty. Okay. So, but it's okay to do it over there. You've got that. You need cobalt, you need nickel. By the way, Russia is one of the primary sources of nickel as well, and not just neon. They're also a major nickel producer. And then if you did all of this, we do not have the grid capacity to actually charge the cars.
Right.
So where are you going to get the grid capacity when you've banned using fossil fuels? There's a place that I used to live was bracketed as a relatively small town, was bracketed by two small cities, each of which had a coal-fired power plant. One of them had 2 boilers, the other one had 3. And so, there's 3 little towns in a suburb of a large city. But if the grid was to go kapoof, you might not have all the power you wanted, but your lights would probably work. Okay, because there was enough local generation to be able to do that. Well, one of those power plants has been completely shut down, and it is, the last time I saw it was about 5 years ago, and it was in a horrid state of disrepair. I doubt it could be restarted. I drove by it and I was like, what? The other one has 1 operating boiler. The other 2 have been shut down, and as far as I know, have not been maintained. So if you wanted to turn those back on, you couldn't.
I mean, it almost gives one the impression that the people in charge of the West are trying to restrict our ability to travel and have prosperity and nice things like modern technology.
It's COVID lockdown part 2, just rebranded.
Exactly.
I don't know what their intent is. Okay, I can't get inside somebody's head. But what I do know is that the laws of thermodynamics are not suggestions. And when somebody shows me a way to violate them, we will have a world that exceeds the capabilities of the Star Trek universe. But nobody has come up with, because I mean, even in Star Trek, they have to use dilithium crystals to get their power, right? There's no free lunch. If we figure out how to come up with a free lunch, oh boy, do we have something good. But nobody's ever done it in the history of mankind. And many people have claimed they have. Many have tried, and all of them have failed. Every single time it has been an abject failure. We knew in the 1960s how to exploit coal, not to burn it directly for power, but from World War II Hitler figured out how to turn coal into synthetic diesel and gasoline. That's how he ran his war machine, because they didn't have any oil in Germany, but they had a lot of coal. They still do. They didn't burn it all up. They don't want to now, but it's expensive. There are a couple of countries in South Africa that do this. Sasol uses this process called Fischer-Tropsch, and it basically exploits the fact that hydrocarbons are just chains of hydrogen and carbon. And if you have carbon as a source and you have hydrogen all over the place, because we have a lot of this stuff called water on this planet, that you have the necessary building blocks. It's just a matter of putting the energy in and arranging the molecules the way you want them arranged. Okay, now that it's energy intensive, but you can do it. And Hitler ran his war on that. Well, as it turns out, there's a very inconvenient thing for people who like to burn coal in the coal, and that's the element thorium. That element's presence in coal is the reason that burning coal causes lung cancer, because thorium is an alpha emitter, and alpha radiation, when it gets into your lungs, is a really reliable way of giving you cancer. Okay, because alpha particles are basically a helium nucleus. They're quite large and very energetic. Well, as it turns out, when you do the math on this, there's 13 times as much energy in the coal, in the thorium, as you get from burning it. And we figured out how to use coal or thorium as a nuclear fuel in the 1960s at Oak Ridge with a liquid fluoride salt reactor. Thorium is not fissile, but it is fertile. So if you bombard it with neutrons, it turns into a fissile element, and it will fission just like uranium does. The nice thing about this particular design is it runs at 1 atmosphere, so it doesn't need high pressure, and it runs at a much higher temperature than do the reactors that we use today for civilian power, which means you don't need to have huge bodies of water in order to cool it. And secondly, the temperature is compatible with the Fischer-Tropsch process. So the path forward, once I started studying this over a decade ago, was pretty obvious. You take the thorium out of the coal, which is easily separated because it's chemically different. It's a different element. You separate it out. You use it to run the reactor. You use the heat from the reactor directly to process the coal into synthetic diesel and gasoline. And you use the remaining energy that comes out the other end of that process to turn a turbine and make electricity. And since you started with 13 times the energy you got from burning the coal, you got plenty of electricity and you got all the diesel and gas you want. And oh, by the way, if you run the math on how much coal you'd need to do this, how much you'd need to use, we have enough in proven reserves in the United States to do this for 500 years.
From what I invested in a company that was, building an experimental thorium reactor. It's gone through, I think, 2 reverse splits, and I sold it when it was in a short squeeze, and I'm happy I did. It seems that we're not necessarily there yet as far as thorium reactors are concerned. There might be some big money powers that don't want to see this come to fruition. What's your take on that?
Well, we know it works because we ran one right here in Oak Ridge for 4 years. Anybody that tries to claim that this is an unproved technology is full of it. We actually ran one at ORNL. It operated for 4 years continuously. There was no safety problem with it. In fact, the way they shut it down on the weekend when they went home was they just turned the lights off and left the building. It's inherently safe. That's not to say you can't have accidents. You can. Okay. I mean, anything can have accidents. And nuclear power is incredibly intolerant of human stupidity. But
as Ukraine knows.
Yeah, well, Chernobyl. Hello. I mean, Chernobyl blew up because of human stupidity. It was not a design fault in the reactor. They were operating it outside the safe envelope, and they knew it. And it blew up because they were stupid, basically. But the reality is we know how to do this. There are engineering issues to be resolved in actually doing this commercially. There's always engineering issues once you have something that works and you have to commercialize it. But they're not irresolvable problems by any stretch of the imagination. Oh, by the way, China is, in fact, proceeding with this. We may not be, but they are. And they'll get it figured out on it from an engineering point of view. And when they do, they're not going to need anybody's anything other than coal as a feedstock. That's it.
Right. Do you think, like, I just, me and expat Aftermath, who's chatting with us tonight, we take a bit of a different approach. We find that this is more coincides with the de-industrialization of the United States. So we may talk about thorium reactors and the other forms of energy and, weaning ourselves off fossil fuels, but it seems that we roll out these grandiose ideas, we scale them back, and the only person that gets hurt is usually the middle class and those that are, already impoverished. And these sanctions on Russia, along with the high gas prices, it just seems that we're kind of sliding into this form of feudalism, as Joel Cocken likes to put it. What's your take?
I think we're headed for a very serious economic contraction. The inflationary impulse that was put into the system during COVID, which, by the way, is very largely Donald Trump's responsibility. It is not. I mean, Biden certainly amplified it and made it worse, but it was Trump who originally started stuffing checks in people's pockets for sitting at home and playing with themselves.
Helicopter money. I remember that. Everyone got their checks.
Yeah. And the problem with that is that everybody loves inflation when it's in asset prices. Okay. When it's in the stock market and to some extent in housing, most people think it's great. It isn't, but it doesn't hurt them directly, because if you own a house and you want to move, you sell a bubble house, you buy a bubble house, other than having to pay taxes on the gains, it's essentially a lateral transaction. Okay, you haven't lost anything really. The person that gets screwed is the person who's just starting out, that's young and doesn't have a house and wants to buy one. They've got a problem. But the people that are actually in that market really don't get hurt by it. Now, if you refinance and you pull the cash out and you blow it on something, and then there's a crash in house prices, you get hammered. But for the ordinary person, that one doesn't have a lot of impact. What it does do, though, is over time, it's extremely destructive, because property taxes are assessed on the value of the property. And so when you have a bubble, what ends up happening is your property taxes go up, and then the governments always find ways to not lower them when, if prices come down. And that happened during 2008 and 2009. You had a lot of contraction in values, but you didn't see many property tax bills get reduced. So that's, because the state and local governments get drunk on the money flow, and they're not about to give it up. So there is damage that's done there. But the bigger problem with the inflation that gets pushed is that you can control how much of it you have. And you have to remember, Milton Friedman famously said that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. It has nothing to do with anything else. And he's right. The problem is you can control how much of it there is by how much credit you emit into the system. And credit and money look like the same thing, but they're not. Credit is a promise to work tomorrow. Money is what you have after you do something and you get paid for it. Okay, but they spend exactly the same way. The $20 bill on my wall spends the same way as my Visa card. But one of them is, I got that money because I went to work and I performed some task for somebody and they paid me. The second one is a promise that I'm going to go to work tomorrow so I can pay the bill. Okay. But from the merchant's point of view, they're exactly the same. They're fungible. But when those pressures get redirected, they get out of the asset markets and they get into real things that people use, you wind up with problems. And we've had 30 plus years of ridiculous ramps, specifically in medical care, that within the next 2 to 3 years are going to blow up the federal budget. They're absolutely going to detonate Medicare and Medicaid, and there's nothing that can be done about it at this point. You would have to multiply the Medicare tax by a factor of 5 in order to be able to balance that, which is never going to happen. You'd have an immediate revolution if you tried.
Do you think they'll try privatizing it along with Social Security?
No, Social Security is not a problem. So everybody loves to put those two things together. Social Security, and in fact, this is a very morbid and terrible thing to say, but COVID actually probably helped Social Security because it killed off a bunch of people and you only get paid out of Social Security while you're alive. So, and the people that COVID got were overwhelmingly those who were beyond the median expected life expectancy. I mean, if you look at the stats, yes, plenty of younger people got killed by it, but statistically speaking, the average age of death was actually beyond the life expectancy of people in the United States. So in terms of the balance sheet, it actually assisted. But Social Security was never in serious trouble to begin with. Before COVID, the last analysis I did, and I haven't looked at it since because the data is lagged. And the other thing is there's some distortions in there because you have people go on disability and stuff like that that impacts it as well. But the last analysis I did said that the cash deficit that the system was running was about 12%. And that's not ridiculously large. That can be fixed. We had a much bigger problem when the Greenspan Commission went through and issued their report, which resulted in lifting some of the caps and some changes in the indexing that were used. And that stopped that from it was going to imminently blow up. And that was stopped with the Greenspan Commission. But what there is now today, if you were to, for example, put 1% on the FICA tax rate and moderately lift the cap, you would bring the system into balance. So this is not an unsolvable problem. Medicare, on the other hand, is between Medicare and Medicaid, it's about 80% unfunded. There's no possible way to fix that. The only thing you can do is collapse the cost of medical care. And that should have been done 20 years ago. When Medicare was put into place, medical care in the United States was between 3 and 4% of GDP. It's 20% now. It's 5 times larger.
Yep.
And yet the tax rate hasn't changed.
It also, building upon that, how unaffordable healthcare is. What do you see with this is a topic I wasn't planning on talking about, but you kind of dawned something on, a little light bulb went off in my head. What about universities? How are people that are like up and coming families, if their child's 18, but their children are now 18, 19, 20 years old, they want to go to, a state-run college, a SUNY school, or, something, again, any college really, private or public. How are people going to be able to afford sending their children, their sons and daughters, to a university for higher education?
They can't. But most people that are in college today shouldn't be there.
But what do you see happening to a lot of these universities that you have to get a COVID jab before coming to our school? Like we have a glut of universities. Let's make no let's not mince words here. I mean,
and students.
Well, it's the problem is, yeah. I mean, the problem is this: the ROI on most university degrees today is negative. Okay, if you look at it with a time, all right. So one of the first things that people have to understand is that time has value, always. All right, the 4 or 5 years you put into getting a bachelor's degree, you can never have back. That time is spent. It has value. And if you are marginal within your field, and let's face it, everybody thinks they're in the top 10%. They're not. Only 10% are.
Right. Yeah.
All right. If you're in the top 10%, you can go do just about anything. All right. I'm a pretty decent programmer. I'm pretty good at circuit design. There's a bunch of things that I can do. I'm one of the people that built the internet back in the 1990s, and I know my way around that stuff. I never had a problem. I left college after 2 years. I never completed it. I never had a problem getting a so-called professional job with every single employer supposedly claiming you had to have a degree in order to get the job. I never had a problem getting hired without having the piece of paper, but I'm good at what I do. The problem is for 90% of the people that are out there and go to school, the only thing they have is a credential. They aren't really all that competent. They may be decent at what they do, but they're essentially trading on the fact that they went out and they spent however much it was to get the degree. All right, well, when you could spin pizzas or flip hamburgers and put yourself through school, there was no opportunity cost to this on a forward obligation basis. What most young people are very bad at, and every young male believes he is Superman, You just ask me in my younger years, and some of the stupid things that I did and managed to survive, probably shouldn't have. I mean, even doing mundane things like going skiing.
Right, right.
Yeah, I mean, this is just the nature of young people, right? They lack experience, and certainly I did at the time, as does everybody else. But you go into a college with a situation where you're having to borrow the money. You cannot pay for it by working. You used to be able to do it. When I went to school, that was an entirely reasonable, impossible thing to do. It was not easy, but it was very, very doable for anybody in any of the state schools. There was just no problem with that. It was that the costs were a tiny fraction of what they are now. If you take on that burden and something goes wrong, and it doesn't matter what, anything, something goes wrong, you're screwed. You are absolutely screwed. And the number of people who go into college with a course book and they say, okay, it's a 4-year program. The last statistic I saw was something like only 30% of them actually come out in 4 years with the paper.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Everybody else either takes 5 or doesn't do it. It's 5, 6, or doesn't do it at all. Well, every one of those people is hosed. Okay. They're absolutely hosed. They shouldn't have gone in the first place. And the system has become so overrun from a cost perspective. I don't know how you fix it. I honestly don't.
Circling back to housing and the cost of living, I'll give you an example use me as a microcosm. I mean, I bought a little shitty condo, and I bought it in June, and it's already appreciated 20%, and it hasn't even been a year. And what I'm seeing is that the if you want to call it inflation, I'm not an expert on this, and I don't pretend to be. Part of the reason why I'm having you on, having this discussion. Let's say I have work middle management. I make $40,000-$50,000 a year, and obviously my lifelong goal is to own a piece of property. If it inflates more than my annual salary, what's the point of me putting my best foot forward? What's the point of me actually working hard? What's the point of me going to college to wind up making $15 or $20 an hour, where it's for a cost of living standpoint is not enough to sustain yourself, to even have a family? Even if, where this channel, we discuss a lot of men related topics, and a lot of guys would like to get married, have children, so on and so forth, but just to have a basic structures and basic fundamentals that we hold dear to our culture. What's the sense of doing anything anymore? You're seeing so many of these guys, we call them NEETs. I like to call them 13th graders, where now they just kind of go on the dole, maybe do an Uber gig, leave a job, work a job 6 months, 1 year here, 6 months there, so on and so forth. Where are we going with all this? What's the long-term outlook? Give us a little bit of predictions.
How do you fix it? I have a daughter who's 25 who wisely decided she didn't get the tech gene, unfortunately. I mean, hey, it's random assortment, right? It's what happens when you have children.
She's a great artist, by the way.
She is a great artist, but a fine arts degree is never going to pay for itself. Okay. But how many times do you get kicked around by people that you're working for before you say, you know what, I'm going to do what I have to do to make things work for right now, but that's all. And we have created that structure in this country. We've done that. And my generation, the previous generation, my parents' generation, we did that. We put that structure in place, and we have stoked it to some extent in the premise that stock prices always go up and that's always good for everybody. Well, it's not good for everybody. It's good for some people. It's not so good for others. It's not at all good for the person who used to be a skilled laborer who could work a skilled job, and today that job is in China that pays $4 a day. It is not good for the person who used to put together cars. Yes, the unions did a lot of very evil and nasty things during the 1970s and did a lot of harm to the automotive industry. But what the automotive industry did in response, putting all the production in Mexico, certainly hasn't done anything good for people's ability to earn a living screwing cars together, has it?
No, well, what you did was bring in foreign imports in the early 80s.
Well, we brought in foreign imports in the early 80s because the cars that Detroit was building at the time stunk.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I mean, and I owned a couple of them. They stunk. But, you know, I have a 2002 truck that's sitting out in my driveway. It looks like HE double matchsticks because the EPA has forced all the manufacturers to change their paint formulation, so the paint doesn't hold up anymore. But mechanically, there's not a thing wrong with it. And that's close to 20 years old. All right. I also have a Mazda in my garage that has over 200,000 miles on it, and there's nothing wrong with that either. Now, that one happened to have been assembled in Japan. And then my daughter has both a GM product and a VW. The VW is coming up on 300,000 miles and still got the factory clutch in it. So, I mean, it's not impossible to build things that don't fall apart. And it's not even impossible for America to build things that don't fall apart. But we should stop with this idea that in pursuit of another $5 in stock prices, that Apple should build their phones in China. Okay. And that we should have all of our chips come over there. Well, you know, that's fantastic, except TSMC, which is Taiwan Semiconductor, makes a large enough percentage, something like 40% of the worldwide silicon foundry capacity is in that one company over there. And it's not so much the processors and things like, you know, Intel doesn't need them. Apple doesn't need them for their, you know, for their A series processors, things like this. That's not the problem. It's that without all the other stuff that they make, those chips are worthless because they have to have all that other glue logic in order to function. And that's the stuff that those guys make. And by the way, building that kind of a fab here in the United States, now supposedly there's one that's going up in the US. TSMC is actually supposedly building one here in the United States. But actually putting that kind of capacity online would take us 10, 15 years unless we were to do it in a Manhattan Project style crash sort of thing, which we won't do because we won't forego all the permitting and the environmental reviews and the EPA, all the screamers and everybody else.
Red tape.
Yeah, we could do it in 3 years if we tell all those people to stuff it, but we won't.
I understand Microsoft is investing something like 20 billion in a microchip plant in the Midwest.
Yeah,
correctly.
Yeah, well, believe me, people, I'm not the only one who's recognized this problem. Okay.
We figured it out on this podcast.
Yeah, and you know, and the thing is that what goes along with that is that the deterioration in reason that comes from being entirely dependent on a communist country is finally starting to sink into some of these people. It's astounding, really, when you think about it. What you know, what we consider, you know, Putin is such a thug, and yeah, okay, he is, and he's a pain in the you know what. What has he done to all these people, the Uyghurs over there? How about those guys? How come we didn't sanction him? How come we haven't cut off, you know, his access to Fedwire in the U.S. Treasury market? Gee, I wonder what the reason for that might be. Might it be that if we did that, our economy would crash in an afternoon?
That's a compelling reason not to.
Well, it's only a compelling reason not to until he decides he wants to grab you by the short and curlies and squeeze.
Yeah, it does kind of make you think like maybe that day is coming.
Well, how do you know it's not happening now? Right? I mean, you think about some of the things that have happened over the last, you know, 5 years. Where was the people on both sides of the aisle? I don't care if Democrat, Republican, doesn't make any difference. Where are the people on either side of the aisle that were willing to stand up and say, you know what, this is going to stop. We're going to stop this. This is not going to be a painless thing. Yeah, stock prices are not going to be at a permanently high plateau while we take care of this issue by any stretch of the imagination. But if we don't do it, eventually we're going to be Ukraine.
It's disturbing.
Well, I mean, if you think about, you think about it, we say we can't have we can't use fossil fuels, so we have to use wind and solar. Okay, guess what? We don't make solar cells here in the United States to any substantial degree. And the reason, again, is that the process is pretty nasty. Also, in addition to that, other than the glass that's on the top layer, they're not recyclable.
Right.
And for that matter, neither are the blades that go on windmills, and they have about a 5-year service life. They're made out of fiberglass. That's polyester resin. We can't recycle them because we don't know what happens if you grind them up into little pieces and put that stuff in the ground.
And then crows apparently drop stones on solar panels that render them unusable.
Well, have you ever had a hailstorm anywhere?
You sure?
I mean,
Yeah.
Good Lord. I mean, you want to talk about taking out capacity. Okay. We have this idea that we can use unreliable things and that we can ignore the laws of physics and it'll all be okay and everything will be fine. Well, Germany got themselves in a pickle doing this, and they have now realized that, listening to people who have absolutely no understanding. I mean, listen, Greta may be a great spokesperson because she's cute, she's young, put her on TV, and she issues the plea of, we can't kill the planet. Da, 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 da. I get it. Okay, I get it. The problem is that she does not understand. She can't understand. She hasn't had the training, and she's too young to have absorbed and processed it. That what she's pushing for, and what all the other people behind her who are telling her to say this, she didn't synthesize this on her own as a path forward. She doesn't have the technical expertise to be able to do that. Somebody told her to get up and make these speeches.
Right.
She's a mascot.
Well, I don't know if she's a man. I'm sure she truly believes what she's saying. That's not the point. The point is she's speaking from ignorance because she can't possibly have actually sat down and penciled any of this stuff out. It's like, I look at this stuff with like people talk about the electric car thing. Okay. So your best case non-return range on those vehicles with some slop for, okay, it's hot, so we use the air conditioner. It's cold, and we use a heater. I get caught in traffic, whatever. Best case, probably about 300 miles, which means about 150 on a round trip basis out and back. Okay. All right. So let's say that you get somewhere, partway somewhere, and you need to stop with a petroleum fueled vehicle. You're in and out of there in 5 minutes, and that includes enough time to go take a piss. Even with the fastest charging systems, you're going to be sitting at that filling station, if you will, for 45 minutes, an hour. All right. So now, how many filling stations do you need? Instead of one every 5 minutes, now a car sits there for an hour. All right. So now I need 12 times as many filling stations. So you go into your local gas station and imagine what it's like when it's 12 times the size.
Right.
All right. And then, by the way, where are you going to get the electrical power to feed it? Because it doesn't exist right now.
I mean, it's we have something like 10,000 gas stations across the country, something like that. That might be an underestimate, but
but just think about taking every single one of them, making it 10 times its current size.
Right. It's preposterous. I mean, it's physically impossible.
Well, yeah. I mean, even ignoring the fact that we don't have the electricity to feed them. Okay.
Right.
Just the physical size element of this is, and then the other thing is, everyone likes to argue cost. Oh, well, gas is very expensive. You know what? Go look at what they actually charge you. Use those high rate chargers on the road. Okay. Yes. If you charge your car off your house, off 240, it's basically like running your clothes dryer for 8 hours.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's about the drain that it puts on your electrical system. All right. But yeah, that is somewhat cheaper than gasoline today. All right. It is less expensive. However, electric powered cars have a very expensive battery pack, $20,000 or $30,000 worth when it wears out, and it will, because it's a consumable like everything else. And okay, yeah, there's a warranty for 6 years or whatever. What happens after the 6 years? Oh, well, I'll trade the car. Okay, so the next sucker has it and it goes out, right? Well, that's expensive enough that it economically destroys the vehicle. We can't recycle lithium batteries, which means now you've got a disposal problem, and those things are toxic and they can catch on fire. So, it's all nice to say that we're all being green and we're all doing all these wonderful things, but you have to look through all of the different elements of this. One of the things about petroleum powered vehicles and fossil fuels in general, we exploit them here. We take all the environmental damage right here in America, because we burn up the gas, we burn up the oil, we burn up the natural gas, whatever. We dig it out of the ground here. All right. So we bespoil our environment and we process it. We refine it here. So to the extent that we need a refinery, which is stinky and, whatever, okay, that's here too. You do this with electric vehicles. None of that stuff's here. It's all over in China. We think it doesn't exist. Oh, yes, it does. All right. It's just not in your backyard. Well, what good did that do you? I mean, we're talking about a global environment here, right? The whole idea here is the planet is in trouble, not just the United States. We don't use petroleum fuels because we're pigs. We use petroleum fuels because nobody has figured out how to get 110,000 BTUs of energy in a 1 gallon container that weighs 6 pounds and that you can pick up. That's why we use them.
Let me tell you what, changing topics, and we'll wrap it up here. Food. Now, I can tell you, I did a chat last week, and I was actually talking about provolone cheese. And I remember my mother, maybe about 15 years ago, complaining about the price of provolone, sharp provolone, being the U was like $7 or $8, and she was showing me the package. I'll never forget this. My mother, getting angry, showing me the price of provolone cheese being $7, $8 a pound. That same cheese is somewhere between $20 and $23 at a supermarket, a regular middle of the road supermarket. And I brought that story up to my mother recently, and she was just asking, like, where does it end? And I'm getting a little confused about the variations between deflation, stagflation, and inflation. Are we, they're talking about rate hikes next month. Do you think those rate hikes will be enough to ease and slow down the inflation we're experiencing, or are we going to see something like a stagflation situation, a scenario that I hear a lot of economic pundits, pontificating and discussing as of late?
Well, if you want to look at the data, the leading economic data that's available to me today, we are on the leading edge of recession now. And because we are also in a very high inflationary environment, we meet the technical definition of stagflation now. Okay. The Fed ultimately has no choice but to very materially raise rates and take the excess liquidity that they've stuffed into the market back out. The equity market is not going to like that one little bit. Neither is the bond market. The deterioration in the bond market in particular, along with the equity market, is already very significant, and they haven't even moved. They're going to have to, because if they don't, you're ultimately going to wind up with probably the bottom third of people in America that cannot afford a place to live, cannot afford the rent. They cannot afford the fuel to put in their vehicle to get to work, and they can't afford the groceries at the store. They can't afford the medical bill to go to the doctor. And you cannot just simply hand that to them with the government printing up more credit. The Fed and government don't print money, they print credit. If they do that in an attempt to somehow assuage the problems those people have, they just make the problem worse, because that money sloshes right back into the supply chain and it drives up the price even more. So the only way to solve the problem is to cut it off. Now, the problem that presents for the government in particular is that with the deficits and the debt that we have, if they do that, then the federal government has to cut out the deficit spending. They have no choice because they can't finance it. And as I have said for a long time, when this squeeze comes, and I pointed out that this was going to happen 10 years ago, I said, when it occurs, The only place they're going to be able to get this is out of Medicare and Medicaid. And one of two things happens. The programs get scrapped, which politically is disastrous for whoever does it. It could potentially lead to a fracture in the country and even a civil conflict. The only other alternative is to kill the medical monopolists off and return medical care back to being 3 to 4% of GDP. And when I was heavily involved with the Libertarian Party a number of years ago, I pointed out that this was a platform that if they ran on it, they might actually win. They would have 80% of the population who would love them to death because it would take about 20% of their operating budget out of every household in America and throw it in the trash can, which would make everyone immensely better off from the bottom to the top. However, 20% of the population, which are those people that work in the medical field, would want to kill them.
Right, yeah.
All right. So, yeah, they wouldn't touch it. And I spent an awful lot of time and effort putting all the numbers on the table. And then in the 2011-ish timeframe, I was invited to a meeting with a bunch of Senate staffers and put these same figures on the table in front of them. And every one of them said that they already knew what I was talking about. They knew I was right. And none of them would go anywhere near it because they'd all get fired.
Right.
The next election. So that's fine when it's a choice. And at the time it still was. It's not now. And so the friction, I don't know how the friction point gets resolved, but you have people in office on both sides of the aisle that know that if they take on this system, they're going to be accused of throwing Granny down the stairs. We're going to hear about the death panel thing.
Right.
It's going to be endless. Okay. And these lobbies are extremely powerful. The medical and pharmaceutical lobbies are unbelievable. They spend more money than anybody else in Washington, D.C. And they will scream like nobody's ever heard before. But if we don't do it and we don't get the deficit spending under control and get the interest rate structure under control, you see, at the short end, interest rates always have to be positive relative to economic growth. If your GDP is expanding by 3%, rates always must be higher than that. They also must be higher than inflation. So if you have a 3% inflation rate, the short end of the curve has to be at something over 3. It could be at 3.2, it could be at 3.5, but it has to be over 3 because time has value. And when you tell people time doesn't, you always get speculative bubbles. They always burst. Exponents. Every kid learns this in the first couple of years of high school. When you have your first algebra classes, whether it's in junior high or in high school, we all learn this. We all sit there with a piece of graph paper. We graph out what an exponential curve looks like. It doesn't matter how small the number is that you start with. If you keep running that exponential curve for a long enough period of time, it goes straight vertical up. And that's where we are now. We're right on that cusp of that straight vertical. That straight vertical up destroys everybody.
But what about housing? I feel like housing is a much bigger problem than the medical, the big pharma medical industrial complex.
Well, they both are very serious, but the thing is this: if you solve the medical problem and you take the leverage out of the system, housing would the entire crank job that we've had since the pandemic started would disappear. It'd be gone in an afternoon.
Okay.
But at the same time, you take about 20% out of everybody's operating budget within their household.
I don't remember if it was me and you had this conversation last time, but the thing is that you're having so many people from blue states moving to red states, and they're putting a huge strain on the infrastructure and local economies in these hamlets, towns, second tier, third tier cities, that they're not able to fill this demand. So I had a chat with this guy from Atlanta recently, and Atlanta was a fairly affordable city. I mean, it's reasonable. You're having people that worked in the major downtowns of Atlanta being priced out. Now they have to live 30, 40 minutes outside of downtown Atlanta. That's similar to what New York City's been for the past 30 years. And you're seeing this again, this leveling effect across the United States, where places like, Memphis, Knoxville, again, Atlanta, Charleston, South Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, where again, people are being priced out of their own cities, and you're seeing what it's like the same situation like in New York City, where I have to live 40 minutes outside New York City to drive to my job. But these second tier cities don't have the same economic opportunity as like a New York City, as like a San Francisco or Los Angeles or Chicago. You're having individuals that are 50 years or older, retired, they sell their properties in, California, in like places of like Connecticut, Rhode Island, Poughkeepsie, New York. They sell their homes. They're liquid, $500,000, $600,000 worth of cash because they bought the house, 30 years ago, coming down to a second tier city in the South usually, or the Midwest, buying up these properties. They don't necessarily put back into the local economy other than to take out of it, buying granite countertops, durable goods, refrigerators, appliances, cars. What do you see long-term in that aspect of things, where young people have already fled these areas and now their parents are right behind them with huge down payments, pricing out their own children?
Well, it's a huge problem. I live in Sevier County, which, is right over from Knoxville, right? And one of the things that I pointed out, I've shown up at the county commission meetings a couple of times, and I pointed out that with what's going on in the world right now, and especially with Biden's promise to essentially destroy simple low-cost tourism, specifically personal automobiles fueled by gasoline, and that this is to a large degree a tourist destination, that the county had better figure out a way for people to be able to make a decent living doing something other than cleaning hotel rooms, or 5 years from now, there's going to be a very serious problem.
Right. Yep.
All right. Then the other thing that goes along with it is that the ramp that happened, I bought my place here right in January of 2020, so just before the pandemic started. I, of course, did not know that the pandemic was going to occur, but it did. And then I look at the places that were comparables that I looked at before I purchased this, some of which have come back on the market, and the imputed increase in the value of this house has been something along the order of 40 or 50% over the last year and a half. Okay, now that's nuts. The problem is that at that price, there is nobody, there are no jobs within a 2-hour drive of here that pay enough for a family to be able to afford to buy the place. Okay, so the only people who are coming in here and doing this are people that are fleeing from somewhere else or cashing out from somewhere else and are transacting for cash, or they're transacting for 3/4 the value of the place, whatever. They have very small notes, which sounds okay at the time. And again, the county loves it because, gee, all the transactions that take place, right? They get their fees, and then of course they get the property taxes. The problem comes when, okay, that person, gee, that was dear old Gramps. Gramps dies, and Junior, what does he do? Because his job doesn't pay enough to cover that house. And if he tries to sell it, who's he sell it to? Is there another Gramps? There better be, because someone in his peer group, the estate, typically, if nobody wants to keep it, then they got to liquidate it, right? Well, you do that, you got to sell the place. Well, that means somebody else has to buy it, and if the price is way beyond what someone of a median salary that is earned in this area can pay, what happens to the value of the property?
Well, it's supposed to go down.
Well, I
right, in reality, right?
Well, I expect this shift of people is a short-term phenomenon, because those people eventually either A, move on, or B, they die. All right. I mean, that's morbid, but it's true.
The great boomer die off is what you're insinuating?
Well, look, nobody lives forever.
Right.
All right. I mean, there's one thing that's certain for all of us, and that's eventually we're going to push daisies. All right. I don't care how good you are or what you think of yourself. That happens for every single one of us. And when you get in a situation, or it's just very simple, you get old and frail, and whatever you have is not appropriate to your need anymore. All right. So you need to sell it.
Mhm.
Well, there better be another person with a wad of cash from New York that wants to buy it, because none of the people who are working here can pay that. And if there isn't, then all of that air that went into the bubble in 2020 and 2021 and the first couple months of this year, all that air is going to come right back out.
Right, but what if you keep inventory suppressed on purpose to keep the housing prices up? Because that's what I think is being.
Okay, well, okay, what good does that do you? Who cleans the hotel rooms?
Yeah, yeah, true. Yeah.
All right, I mean, people think that they can play this game and they can manipulate supply, and I mean, there's always people out there that think they can pull that kind of stuff. The first question I ask is, your car's broken. How much can the guy that's going to fix it afford to pay for somewhere to live? Because if the answer is he can't live here, your car doesn't get fixed.
Mm-hmm.
All
Those
right.
are short-term phenomenon. You're located in near Knoxville, Asheville, North Carolina, which is, I think, the most unaffordable city in North Carolina, is planning to open up an additional 500 units in hotel space. If you know anything about Asheville, there's already a glut of hotels, Airbnbs, motels, so on and so forth. Asheville doesn't have that much to offer. It's kind of like a larger college town in a sense. A lot of young people like to go there and party, then return, drive back an hour, 2 hours away from where they came from. But, you have such an influx from people from the north buying up properties around this area that not everyone can, make beds or work being a receptionist at, a high-end hotel. It kind of coincides with what you're discussing right now.
Well, yeah, you could. I mean, that's all fine and well, but the person who's making $10 or $15 or $20 an hour has to have somewhere to live, and if he's making $20 an hour, he has 40 grand.
So then what about things like this whole, everyone's talking about BlackRock buying up homes, Premier, God, the name slips my mind. Another REIT that's buying up single family detached homes. There's a lot of talks about that. I was having this conversation with my father. My father's in real estate, and we're kind of punting ideas back and forth. And he's saying, like, it's not economically viable for these REITs and hedge funds to buy up single family homes because you still have to maintain them. And when you have detached homes that are all, again, you're talking about a city block or a huge suburb, a sprawling suburbs. That's really hard for a management company to manage that, sending out maintenance to take care of it, the cost and gas to maintain all these type of things. It's better for a bank to give a loan out and have them maintain it. I just don't see what the long-term strategy is with these hedge funds and in these REITs buying up detached single-family homes, because if we go back in the 70s, if you look at like New York City and what it was like, these landlords were just getting hammered in overhead costs, where this is where the term slumlord came from. I remember the Dracula landlord who did about like 10 years in jail, and he wasn't allowed to rent properties out of some type of plea deal he made with the New York City government. Why are they kind of reversing the course and trying to bring about this whole I call it feudalistic system, because that's where, again, these massive landlords buying up all the big swaths of land and again renting it out, when in fact they can't necessarily maintain it long term. Eventually they have to liquidate those assets because it's not economically viable for them to necessarily maintain them, especially like a home that's 50, 60, 70 years old. I mean, most of the stock in the United States are homes that were built in the 50s. Right. And all these new HOAs that they're building across the United States and like the Southwest, it's all shoddy construction material because of inflation, because of labor cost. Plaster walls, 50 years, a plaster wall would last. You don't have to necessarily worry about maintaining it, even if you got some water damage on it. Today with sheetrock, you get some water on that, especially in a high humid area, you have to rip out the entire wall or even, have to redo the electrical. I just don't see the long-term vision that the ruling class, the powers that be, what have you, people like Larry Fink, what's their vision? What's their long-term objective? You have any idea?
I think they believe they can continue to squeeze people and somehow it will work, and that the government will continue to chug along, running $1 trillion, $2 trillion, $3 trillion deficits.
Yeah.
These guys are supposed to be the masters of the universe when it comes to mental firepower with investing and how the markets work. I sometimes question whether or not they managed to pass third grade arithmetic.
It's
And
true. Yeah.
I mean, seriously, I hear some of the stuff, some of the stuff I hear on CNBC in the morning is just like, I mean, they're nuts. And, Kudlow, who's now, he was one of Trump's economic advisors. He used to be on CNBC. And back at the time of the housing crash, they had me on a couple of times. They blackballed me when I refused to shut up about the fact that the banks that did a lot of these things, these were actually criminal felonies, and an awful lot of these people should have gone to prison for it. A lot of people did go to prison after the SNL blow up for exactly the same reason. And of course, but that's their corporate masters didn't like that very much because those are the guys that pay for the advertising. So I don't get asked to show up on any of the networks anymore. But Kudlow, of course, is out there. He had a thing up on Fox News today because he was Trump's primary economic advisor. Now Trump is gone, but he's still got a big mouth and still got a microphone because of his position. Well, I mean, they give him the mic because he had that position. Okay, that's it is what it is.
A little bit of a safety valve in my sense at this point to calm down that base. I don't know. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think that's some of it, but I think it's also I mean. Let's face it. If I had been one of Trump's economic advisors, I'd probably have a microphone in my face every time I stuck my head out the door. Right. So, but the thing is that nobody wants to look at the long-term economic impact of essentially hiding inflation for the space of 30, 40 years through the offshoring and fiscal game playing that we've done. Selling debt over to China as a way to offshore the inflationary impact of our policies here in the United States is insane. And it is guaranteed to blow up in your face. Okay, it's absolutely guaranteed to blow up in your face. And everybody who did it knew that at the time it was started. And yet once you start, it gets almost impossible politically to stop, because you have to tell people, oh, sorry, your cheese ration's been cut in half this week. So I don't know what these guys on Wall Street think is going on here with the Dow where it is and the NASDAQ and the S&P. There's been quite a little swoon, and especially in some of the names that are sensitive to this kind of thing. I don't think it's over by any stretch of the imagination. And frankly, with the people that we have in office right now, I mean, for God's sakes, we had Yellen, who presided over some of the most insane Federal Reserve policy. I mean, other than Ben Bernanke, she was the worst there's ever been. Now you got Jerome Powell, who's even worse than that. And where is she now? She's Secretary of Treasury, for crying out loud.
That's right.
All right. So I mean, this is the revolving door. You have nobody that's being an adult in the room and saying, oh, by the way, that punch bowl everybody's drinking out of? It doesn't have booze in it. It's got LSD in it. Stop.
And here comes Putin, he's the bouncer of the party, wrecking everyone's good time.
Well, Putin is the shiny object that we can all blame right now. And not that he hasn't given us plenty of reason to do it, right? I mean, going and shooting up another country certainly, falls under that category. But the idea that he caused this inflationary impulse is just nuts. It's been going on for years. And when COVID started, what Trump put in place the government can cover everybody's check. Donald Trump knew better than this. He nearly blew himself up in the 1980s by taking on leverage on a wanton and reckless basis. And when economic conditions tightened, it very nearly bankrupted him.
That's right. In Atlantic City, what is it, Taj Mahal?
Well, it wasn't just Atlantic City. It was a bunch of, it was him personally. It wasn't just, a couple of his projects, because everybody goes after, he bankrupted this country. He bankrupted. Well, you know what? If you run 300 of them, you bankrupt 5. I don't think you did so bad. But this was a much more existential threat, but it was a long time ago, and most people don't remember it. I do, because I was a young adult at the time, and I went through the, hey, listen, what are we having for tonight? Well, 2 hot dogs. That's all you got the money for.
Hey, I'll wrap it up here. Just out of curiosity, have you been following the situation in China regarding Evergrande?
Yeah. Well, everything China. Okay. So 2 things you have to understand about China, and I'll make it brief because I know we're running out of time.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. Have some fun here.
Okay. So China has 2 currencies. Everyone thinks they have one. They have 2. There is the external one that you see, that is used to settle things outside the country. And then there is a second version of it that cannot be converted except with the direct permission of the Communist Party and the central bank. And this is why China will never be the reserve currency of the world, because nobody's going to tolerate that outside of the country. It is also situations like Evergrande can go on because nobody can call their loans outside of China, because you can't convert back and forth outside without the permission of the Communist Party and the central bank. You cannot do it.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result, you have all of this economic data. There's complete nonsense that comes out of them. It's just a flat out lie. But there's no way to prove it, and there's no way to call them on it, because they have absolute iron-fisted control over everything. Essentially, they have a sanctions regime that is there all the time that prevents anybody from ever calling the bluff of any of the people that run any of the garbage that goes on over there.
Yep.
And the government, if the government doesn't, now, oh boy, the government decides they don't like you one day. Okay, you're done, because there is nothing you can do. And this is the nature of communist countries. It is how they work. And Z and the CCP are not stupid. They designed it in such a way that it would be very difficult to penetrate from the inside or from the outside. Outside pressure is absolutely meaningless to them for that reason. There is really little or nothing you can do to them. Like I said, the only real risk that I saw on the horizon over the space of 20 plus years ago was the possibility of an energy crunch that would lead them to go after Russia. But that has now been alleviated because we very conveniently intervened there and strengthened their ties.
Just the food for thought. I feel like as if Russia and China are aligned militarily, but China is more aligned financially to the United States. So there's definitely some tension there. We already know the cooling between the Chino-Sino alliance that transpired, but I think it's interesting because you would imagine China would like to gobble up Siberia for its natural resources and such, and I'm sure Russia is kind of weary of that to a certain extent. It's just my 2 cents,
Well, yeah, they're wary of it. They know exactly what could happen, and the only way to stop them would be to blow them to Mars.
Right.
So I mean, it's but the other side of that too is that I don't think anybody, and I'm sure Putin's not this stupid. I don't think anybody should ever underestimate the fact that the Chinese play the long game. They always have.
Yep.
They don't think in terms of a quarter of the next year. They think in the terms of the next 100 years, or even longer. And they are very patient people, but at the same time, they are perfectly happy to play chess with you and give you all the rope you need to hang yourself. And as soon as you think you've got them, they will tie that up short and put you right up on the tree. So they have certainly managed to run a huge con job with the United States and the businesses over here. Can you imagine what would happen if they decided to go grab Taiwan, and the wailing and gnashing of teeth that would take place on this side? Would Apple stop selling iPhones in China?
Right.
Would Nike? What would Nike do? Nike makes their shoes over there. What would Nike do?
And I'm sure Taiwan is the government of Taiwan seeing how much legitimacy and there's a bit of a power vacuum in the United States, at least with, we go back to Obama with Syria, with the red line, now with Ukraine, because I think the American populace is wizened up to a lot of the nonsense and propaganda that's perpetuated at Washington, not to mention, mocking, ridiculing, disrespecting the working class in the United States. I just don't see how the United States can go to a war with any type of major power, or even a second tier power of like, North Korea or, whatever. It doesn't, there could be.
I don't know about that. I think you should be, be a little careful there. Okay. I mean, yes, we've gone an awful long way down the woke trail, okay, if you will, when it comes to the military side of things. But I would not discount the ability on a technological basis for us to go and kick some serious ass. The problem always comes when you go beyond that. It's one thing to bomb the living hell out of people and blow up their stuff. But as Putin has showed it, and he's shown everyone with this, and anyone who's not paying attention to what he's doing right now, is you really ought to sit down and think about it for a minute. The only way you actually take something when it comes to a war, the only way you actually win is when you go in there and you take the land and you hold it. And that means you have to go in on the ground. And the minute you're willing to make that commitment, some of your people are going to get killed, maybe a lot of them.
Right.
What the big question that I think is open in the United States right now is that if we got into some kind of a serious dust up and one of our carriers was sunk, would we rally around that like what happened in Pearl, or would we turn tail and run and say we're not willing to spend 5,000 American sailors' lives with one missile?
Do you want to know my personal opinion on that? I think the United States would descend into a civil war.
Well, it might, but again, there's a number of scenarios that could come out of that, and a lot of them are bad.
Yes.
Absolutely. So I just, and I don't like any of them that lead to somebody feeling like they're cornered, because that's exactly when someone starts reaching for that football.
Well, listen, Karl, I really appreciate you coming on. I had a lot of fun. Let's do it again sometime soon. We won't make it as long as last time. Like I said, last time we spoke was in August. I know my listeners love you. I'll be sure to send you a copy of this recording. Guys, I'm going to put everything in the show notes. His website is, why don't you tell us, Karl, what's your website? Where can we find you?
Market-ticker.org, and make sure that you look to the right. There is a click button over there. And if you're on a phone, or on the other, it says click here for what the media does not want published. And so there are two sections, one of which is advertiser supported, and the other one that contains topics that the various ad networks do not like to have discussed.
Do you have any plans on writing a book? I saw you had one book up on Amazon. Is there anything you got kicking in the fires as far as content goes?
I don't know, to tell you the truth. I mean, I've certainly have been plenty of people poke me about doing one on the last couple of years. Whether or not I could actually find somebody that would be willing to pick it up. I mean, Wiley is an academic publisher, and they picked up Leverage, which made me quite happy. Whether or not they'd be interested in that one, I don't know.
Well, listen, Karl, you enjoy your weekend. Thanks so much. We'll definitely be in touch. All right.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye. Well, that was Karl Denninger, everybody. Great mind. Really, really psyched to have him on. I was introduced to him by Foreign Devil / Expat Aftermath. Are you still there, Expat?
I am indeed.
You sound a little distant.
No, it was. I'm sorry. The mic has moved away from me, but no, I was just kind of enjoying the repartee in the last half hour.
Oh yeah, it was great. I love
fascinating discussion.
I know, it was awesome.
Yeah.
Well, do you have anything you have to say? I mean, we got like 10 more minutes. We're coming up on the 2-hour mark.
No, I mean, not really. Nothing to add to that. I mean, gosh. It was a pretty wide-ranging discussion, but I don't know.
I think we hit all the main points we wanted to talk to him about.
Yeah, I think so. I'm starting to see a lot of serious people comment about, the possibility of massive global famine in the months ahead. So I would keep an eye on that. It sort of dovetails with what we're talking about. But I'm sort of poking around on the Best Canned Meat website.
Yeah, great stuff, guys. Check it out. I bought a few cases myself.
It's really good. Bestcannedmeat.com. The company is called Wertz, Wertz.
They give you recipes too if you buy a case.
Yep. No, they do. It's really good. I mean, like I decided to try it out, and this is not like a sponsored thing or anything, but yeah, they sell you homegrown beef and pork in 28 ounce or 15.5 ounce cans, and you can buy them, in packs. It's a little bit on the pricey side. Like I think I bought the variety 4-pack, 14.5 ounce cans, and it's like 2 beef and 2 pork. It's $58, but the meat is absolutely delicious. Of course, you don't have to freeze it, right? It's canned meat. Very fatty, right? Like it has the lard or whatever inside. But you just stick it in the microwave, put it on some rice, make a burrito, whatever. It's just absolutely delicious, and probably a good food to stock up on for the lean times to come.
I'm waiting for a couple other things to happen before I stock up and throw more money at my preps.
Yeah. Well, you already have. Well, yeah.
Well, no, I got it. It's not enough, and I guess you can never have enough when it comes to your preps. But I'm waiting to see. Look, I think I got a good idea on what to watch out for. I mean, for fuck's sakes, I ran out of New York City right when the BLM protest happened, and I'm like, oh, that's it, time to run. And I'm glad I did. I got out at a good time. So I'm watching. I'm going to see what happens. Really want to see how much more gas is going to go up. Like if it starts to getting close to the $6, then I'll start loading up on a little bit more preps.
Yeah, of course, the concern is that, you're too late by that point, right? Because by the time the signs are obvious, then other people are seeing it too.
Like I said, MS Estonia, my friend.
Yeah.
MS Estonia.
Like that.
It'll be okay. It's all right. It's just a little list. We can go back to the dance hall.
Right. Just stop worrying. Nothing to see here. Something I just retweeted from a guy named Douglas Carr. I guess he's some sort of author, speaker, consultant. So he said he had a conversation with a farm today, and they're telling him that meat processors are booked out a year because people are stockpiling beef. Farmers in the South can't get fertilizer for crops now. Farmers in the Midwest are switching. They can't get nitrogen nor fertilizer. And as for the stockpiling, he clarified that rich people are buying up beef, I think, and they're freezing it.
Well, I'm not even freezing it. It's like I got to think about it. There's no fucking power.
Well, that's there you go. That's an issue. Then you need backup power.
Then you got to run it on a silent generator because if the marauding incels hear the hordes of incels hear your generator going, and they want to turn their
target
on.
Yeah, this is real sort of apocalyptic. Well, but it's funny though how people used to be called crazy for prepping, right? I mean, even just a few years ago, you were like a lunatic if you were stocking up, and now it's sort of become normal in a way. I mean, this conversation that we're having is probably not normal, but the idea of having reserve, of having a deep larder, having toilet paper and paper towels and canned goods. I mean, that's not so crazy anymore, is it?
No.
I mean, and if you think it is, then you're just a moron, and you need to open your eyes. I mean, I think that COVID should have been a big tip off when people went into the grocery store and the shelves were empty.
It was for me. Was for you. Again,
well, I had already been a little bit before that, but
yeah. Well, it
was a wake up call.
The red pill community, we're kind of we got our ears to the ground. We watch for those telltale signs of impending doom.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we'll be in touch. Fortunately, Ian was supposed to make it tonight, and I want to thank you, Expat Aftermath, for filling in for Ian tonight. He had something to do with work.
Not a worry.
He had to cancel short notice, but I plan on doing some streams with him. We still got to finish the strategic relocation. I got some show notes. We got a few states we got to belt out. And obviously, when we were doing that, we were not expecting a war in Ukraine. So, obviously, that's taking a bit of a back seat for current affairs and,
Nobody expected World War III.
Right. So, all right, man.
Tends to throw a wrench in things.
Well, listen, it's getting late. I'll touch base with you. All right.
All right, sounds good.
Have a good night.
All right, you too now.